in the program. And this being one of the kind of events that we're really happy to be putting on, bringing more dialogue to the space rather than just exhibition. And we really hope that after the talk, there will be a dialogue between the audience and the speakers, and just a kind of an exchange. So my name's Nadim. I'm one of the directors here, and Anya Henkel is the other one. She's gone at the moment.
She's here.
Oh, she's right here. I always ignore her. She's my girlfriend. Without further ado, I just wanted to introduce the two speakers this evening. The first is Max Schreier. Max is the curator of the current exhibition that you see in the space, Gordian Conviviality. And the second is Hannah Klemm, who is based in Chicago. So we are honored to have her in Berlin for this talk. So without further ado, I'll just leave it to Hannah.
Okay. Are you good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a talk written, and I'm going to sort of read it, but the point of this is to sort of open up a dialogue, so hopefully afterwards Max and Nadim and I can talk and everybody can enter in. So it's not to sort of close off conversations, it's kind of to provide different ways of thinking about the issue of computer or digital art, internet, this sort of massive thing that has had so much trouble to be defined over the last years. So, all right. So computer art, digital art, internet art, other various new media arts that utilize technology as a medium or as a mediation device have always held a tenuous place in the art world, existing on the fringes of the mainstream, continually present, yet never fully taken into the inner circle by the art world. Much ink has been spilled on the matter, yet the conversation still seems far from concluded, and a vocabulary in which to discuss this type of work is very much still in the making. This divide revolves around many issues, such as the elusiveness of the materials of new media, the imagined lack of concrete objects, and the continuously changing technological landscape. As I began to investigate this work, it has become more and more apparent to me that there is in fact a need to reevaluate some of the normative assumptions of art criticism and art theory as they pertain to the realm of the digital. This relationship of the mainstream art world to various digital practices was brought center stage when in September of 2012, Claire Bishop published her much criticized article, Across the Digital Divide, in Artforum's New Media themed issue, the first to focus on new media practices in the 50-year run of the magazine. In her article, Bishop argues two things. First, that the mainstream art world predominantly ignores digital media due to its ongoing fixation with analog practices such as film, video, and archival projects that produce objects. She claims that the making of these auratic forms is still what is privileged in today's contemporary art market. Second, she asks the question of why there isn't more mainstream art made that reflects on what it means to think, see, and filter effect through the digital. This article, published in such an important mainstream art world magazine, garnered a huge response, especially from proponents of new media. Everyone from Lauren Cornell of Rhizome to Paul Teasdale of Freeze.de wrote a response criticizing Bishop. While I'm not going to catalog their responses here, the dialogue that ensued has made me think about the relationship between mainstream art and digital art practices. What I did notice, reading through all the articles and responses, was that while Bishop is discussing the mainstream art world and art market's lack of interest in the digital, she also doesn't address the parallel fact that contemporary art theory and criticism not based in new media studies has also been slow to take up artists working in this internet-based or digital art scene. While the responses correctly pointed out that there are in fact many artists working with the digital that are accepted and embraced by the art world and arts institutions, such as Corey Archangel or Ryan Tricarton, who have both become staples of the museum world, net art panels and gallery booths featuring these artists have become prevalent at art fairs such as Frieze, Nada, Art Basel, Miami Beach. And many artists in this gallery, and whom I will discuss later, definitely take up the effects of the digital revolution on society as their primary subject matter. Yet there's a lack of concern with the actual art historical and critical dialogue surrounding this work. She was correct that there is evidence of a pervasive feeling of a divide that can be traced back at least as far as the first computer art exhibitions of the 1960s, particularly as it's been taken up in theory, criticism, and art history. There are various ways that this divide emerges in the art world, but in terms of art history, I think we need to look at digital art's relationship to the language or structure of art itself, more than its ability to produce erratic, saleable, physical objects. Art since modernism has been in an epic struggle with the art object itself. Its dematerialization through the pluralism of the 1960s neo-avant-garde exasperated the modernist fear that the art object in a post-Duchampian world will become just another arbitrary object. This has been seen throughout the 20th century in performance art, land art, conceptual art, socially engaged art practices, and relational aesthetics, to name only a few. The problem of the mainstream art world concerning current internet art is not about the fact that some artists don't make objects. It's about discerning what the language of art is here. We need to look at the art world as both a market and a historical and theoretical community that at times almost creates a closed loop of critical energies. More than anything, the art world responds to things that can be described within the traditions of art, and that includes projects that extend from avant-garde notions of rupture and disruption, not merely those of modernism. I want to turn to a quote from the academic collective Our Literal Speed. I think this sort of describes the problem that I'm trying to discuss here. They stated in the 2009 October magazine questionnaire on the contemporary, quote, "It might be more helpful to think of contemporary art as a spatial relationship between the highly articulated sense of modernist achievement produced within the post-war North American and Western European educational matrix on the one hand, and everything else on the other." In other words, contemporary art still battles with its own particularized history, its own relationship to itself as an idea, in essence to its formations in modernism, all the while battling the unavoidable fact that it exists in the real world. For the remainder of this talk, I'm going to look at what I see as an assortment of trends within the category of digital art or internet art, or whatever we can concern all of this art as being, that address the aesthetic, conceptual, and sociopolitical concerns of art production. I'm going to compare contemporary moments and ideas to various computer art and technologically mediated art practices from the 1960s to the 1990s, and look at how art and technology is both highlighted and then marginalized at different points due to its relationship to the everything else, such as mass media, corporate sponsorship, advertising, etc., and how it always reemerges to fight back for a place in the art world. By doing this, I'm trying to shift the dialogue away from conversations addressing the relationship of art and technology as a mere economic concern of the art market, an art market of scarcity or erratic forms, or namely the claim that since internet art's dematerialized network is too egalitarian and open sourced, it can't be accepted by the mainstream art world. Internet artists have figured out just as well as any artist how to create objects that are saleable. Sometimes they even make more concrete objects than mainstream artists. If Marion Goodman can sell a Tina Segal performance to a private collector, artists can sell websites and galleries. That's not the dialogue I'm trying to open up right here. I'm less interested with this relationship between dealers and art galleries to the stuff and more thinking of the critical art historical concerns around this topic. Perhaps digital art is at times too indistinguishable from the realm of everyday image production, from the visual logic of Facebook or Google, from advertising, corporate image production. And due to this fact, and the type of image world they exist within, this is why possibly the art world hasn't figured out fully how to frame it. I think this type of artistic practice can show us how our network society has produced a new space for the aesthetic. Just as pop art had billboard advertising or shop window display, an institutional critique of the museum or gallery space, digital artists have contemporary network society. In some ways, a world in itself, where individuals and corporations exist alongside each other in a totally new way. The digital world has opened up art making to a new virtual realm, ripe for aesthetic exploration and social and institutional critique. Yet the question still remains, what is the critique present here, and what is the art saying? What aspects of both contemporary society and contemporary art practices are these works dialoguing with? At times, this relationship has become fuzzy. As artist Artie Vierkant says in his essay in Post-Internet Culture, quote, "What comes to matter is not that an artist has presented some aspect of the spectacle and how it fits neatly into some aspect of a linear or historical trajectory. What matters is that the presentation that they have created a proposition towards an alternative conception of cultural objects." In order to suss out this relationship with the digital realm to the ideas of art, I want to look at a recent exhibition called Shell Reflexive. It was shown in Miami at a satellite of Art Basel in 2012. This gives a framework for the first issue I'm going to address, the relationship between art and economics or corporate production. In the press release for Shell Reflexive, Agatha Warren states that the project involves two phases. The first addresses how art has developed as a, quote, protective shell of meaning due to its ability to set itself apart from normal objects. Laura is claiming that the works in this show are inspired by the very objects usually left out of art discourse, creating a ready-made gesture in a digital world. She then claims that phase 2 of the project is to dissolve the hierarchy between the art object and the consumer object. In some ways, this can be seen as an attempt at reappraising the art object and the networks that the art object exists within, alongside a reappraisal of the relationship of the viewer to an art object, one that she sees as being clouded by the spectacle world of images and trying to distill those objects to their very object-like form. How can one go beyond the limitations of the ready-made and retain the project of making these things quasi-objects that point beyond the limitations of the contemporary commodity? This is a question I think really comes out of this project. So what is the relationship to these objects versus commodities? And here's an example of the interior of the show. So it's meant to be like a store, but they were all designed by artists. I'm sure people have read about this. And playing with ideas of like image proliferation in the digital. Paul Teasdale in A Piece for Frieze articulates this problem as it's seen in this exhibition quite nicely, saying, quote, "These artists seem to be highlighting the economic logic of Google or Facebook not by critiquing, but by imitation. We'll sell you the platform, but reserve the rights to the artwork," end quote. More than merely utilizing technology in the digital, contemporary artists are interested in the digital realm as it relates to a variety of artistic conceptions, as interventions into our society's production of invisibility. In other words, if we grant that a work of art is both more or less than other types of images, this type of work can be seen as a point of departure for analyzing the complex interrelationships of artworks with other things. And it is for this reason and this reason alone that Katya Novoskova's iPhone skins are artworks and not just another slickly designed iPhone skin. Shell Reflexive very specifically draws attention to the productive and problematic relationship between the world of corporate technology and art practices that goes back to early computer art that was sponsored by technological companies. In the beginning, the pairing was a peaceful and entirely codependent one. Technology was not readily available to the average person. Computer technology in the 50s and 60s is what they're talking about, what we're talking about here. In fact, computer programmers and engineers created the first computer art. The first computer art exhibitions, which ran concurrently in New York and in Stuttgart in 1965, were both organized by scientists through galleries and not by traditional artists. These artist-engineers, such as A. Michael Knoll, were motivated mainly sorry. I don't know, it's not going back. It is. There may be no pictures. I'll keep going.
Yeah,
Do I just need to like... These artist-engineers were motivated mainly by an interest in visual phenomena as it related to the creation and the growth of computer graphics. At its start, the majority of computer art consisted of computer programs designed to simulate existing art styles. Knoll has become a famous example of this phenomenon. As a researcher at Bell Laboratories, Knoll created an algorithmic simulation of Piet Mondrian's 1917 painting, Composition with Lines. Mondrian's painting, a seminal work of abstraction, intended to distill art to its most transparent form. According to Knoll, it was a perfect piece for computer adaptation. The pattern of short horizontal and vertical bars lent itself to digital articulation. Knoll's program was successful in creating a simulated Mondrian. In order to test the success of his creation, Knoll surveyed the public and showed a printout of the work to 100 people alongside a printout of the original Mondrian. 59% of people preferred the computer-generated image to the original Mondrian. He published these findings as a success for computer art in the Psychological Record in 1966. For Knoll, what was important was the perception of the viewer. It was the idea that art could be reproduced and made accessible to the masses through changes of technology. That art could become something that everybody made through the magic of the computer. There was a feeling with early computer artists that they were going to change the very nature of an artist. Starting in the 1960s, modern arts institutions and artists became increasingly involved with these newfound computer arts techniques and artistic explorations of the concept of cybernetics and system theories. From 1968 to 1970, there were 4 seminal exhibitions of art utilizing modern technology and setting the stage for the institutional reception of art and technology. They were at the Institute of Contemporary Art in London in 1968. It was an exhibition called Cybernetic Serendipity. Also in 68, MoMA had The Machine as seen at the end of the mechanical age. Concurrently was Brooklyn Museum's exhibition Some More Beginnings, which was organized by the group Experiments in Art and Technology, founded by artist Robert Rauschenberg and Bell technology engineer Billy Kluver. And finally, the Jewish Museum's 1970 exhibition, Software, curated by Jack Burnham. These exhibitions intended to mix artists' work with the image construction of mathematics and scientists. Cybernetic Serendipity's curator, there's a picture of Yazia Reichert, even boasts in her introduction that unless the viewer reads the catalog or wall text, they wouldn't know if the works were by an artist or a computer technician. In MoMA's, there's another view of it. In MoMA's, The Machine is seen at the end of the mechanical age. Over 200 artworks and objects were displayed alongside each other, from traditional objects to objects made by computers to non-art objects such as cars and cameras. This exhibition traced art responding to industrial life and the human use of machines, from the Russian constructivist to kinetic art to paintings of machines, such as those by Ferdinand Leger's surrealist paintings inspired by the industrial world. It also included 9 works produced by the collaboration of artists and engineers for competition sponsored by EAT. EAT's goal, according to Rauschenberg and Kluver, was to maintain a constructive climate for the recognition of the new technology in the arts by a civilized collaboration between these 2 groups that he had seen as unrealistically developing in isolation. All of these exhibitions drew much attention to the growing relationship of art and technology in the late 60s, yet they did not succeed in making the art world in general more receptive to this new form of art. This initial interest in the relationship of the computer to art came from a shift in art making towards what we always call the neo-avant-garde, an artist's interest in a plurality of media paired with society's continuous investment in new technology. The same year, 1968, that MoMA had held their machine exhibition, they also exhibited the first post-war show of Dada surrealism called Dada Surrealism and Their Heritage. A few years before that, Camilla Gray's book on Russian constructivism, The Great Experiment in Russian Art, was published, introducing the art world to productivism and the marriage of art and technology that had happened in the Soviet Union in the 1920s. It was also the rise of conceptual art, happenings, and institutional critique. Art making was breaking free of traditional representations and forms again.
And there was light.
Is it smart?
Will they help you read?
A little, but...
Yeah, turn it down, I turn it up and I turn it down. I just thought we don't want to ruin your eyes. It's coming, there it goes. Ta-da. Better?
Sure, yeah, it's a good fit.
Yes.
Squinting to it.
Sorry.
Opening itself up to a direct relationship to everyday lived experience and commercial commodities, all the while attempting to make more transparent systems of distribution, both in the art world and in life itself. Yet there was a serious backlash against computer art in the 1970s and 1980s due to a couple of factors. First, the relationship of computer technology, systems theories, and technology corporations to the research and design projects for the military-industrial complex. In the climate of the rebellion and activism against the Vietnam War, many artists in the 1970s began to move away from computer art because of the materials themselves. Secondly, they became very wary of the systems and networks that they encompassed and how they were inextricable from government power and the proliferation of military power and war. Software curator and systems aesthetics author Jack Burnham denounced his ideas that he had promoted in the 1960s, and then in 1980 when he wrote Art and Technology, the Panacea That Failed. He claims at various points in the essay that criticisms of shows like Software and The Machine at MoMA came from this schism between the intellectual idea of art and the ever-growing and disproportionate influence that technology was exerting on everything from nature to cultural values and traditions. He makes a claim that reiterates the statement more literal speed, when as he's pronouncing the failures of art and technology states, quote, "Ultimately, perhaps it's the very weakness of art as a culture force, its conceptual confusion and lack of utilitarian value that actually gives it strength. It's the myth of art itself, in other words, that doesn't allow for the art world to move entirely from an object-oriented one to a systems-oriented one, according to Barnard. That myth he's talking about is the internal logic and idiosyncratic language of art itself. It's the myth of aesthetic consistency, of an understandable teleology, in many ways the myth of modernism and of artistic autonomy. With the invention of the World Wide Web in 1989, we see an increase in the digital. Again, there was a sort of lull in the 80s, causing the internet art boom of the 1990s. Here, internet art was seen as having the capacity to stand in opposition to corporations and to art institutions. Works were made by everyone from hackers to individuals very interested in this newfound technology. Art was everything from causing glitches in websites to selling things on eBay, highlighting the beauties of programming. It existed in the in-between spaces of the internet. Its place as art was also in question due to the fact that the internet had not reached the level of ubiquity that it has now. While the 1960s conceptual movements and performance-based practices had, as previously noted, opened up space for collaboration and de-authorship and dematerialization of the art object, the movement into the platform of the internet shifted the notion of a post-object even further, namely into a virtual object and a virtual space. As this shows, the art world has always been wary of the ways in which technology opens itself up to the world of everything else, to being the mere handmaiden of corporations, or to producing art that is difficult to incorporate within an art dialogue. It is the transparency of this overlap between commerce and the market that art and the relationship of art and technology has always existed. Art maintains that its objects have a privileged place, that they are not mere commodities existing in the marketplace. Yet, the art world has an economic world. It exists in an economic world of its own. These early iterations of computer and technology art were not interested in the intersection of consumer product branding and art production, as something like Shell Reflexive is. The relationship to consumer capitalism was an interest in technology research and technology production. Yet returning to the art of today, digital artworks are still very much interested in the creation of objects and images using technology. And now they're opening it up very much into a dialogue with the consumer world in which we live in. One of the most prevalent trends that seems to come today is a movement of artists away from conceptual or socio-political endeavors and back towards ideas of perception and cognition, but within the digital realm. This stems from an increased interest in object-oriented ontology and thing theory. Artists such as Katya Novoskova, Jacoby Satterwhite, and Tamar Quinn have all had an interest in exploring the perceptual relationship. So this is a cybernetic sculpture. Have all had an interest in exploring the perceptual relationship of humans and digital images or objects to look at the digital world outside of socio-historical concerns. These artists are more interested in exploring shifts in human perception caused by the massive changes that technology has brought into everyday life. In other words, they look at the ways that things are acting and evolving on their own as objects rather than within their socio and cultural structures. It is about scientific and image evolution, separate from social history and socio-political implications. In some ways, this shift can be seen as an extension of other formalist theories. It imbues the objects with a contingent autonomy. This art is interested again in technology as a medium, and in some ways in the autonomy of the art object, the value the art object has outside of its consumer realm, through this interest in its objectness or thingness. In other words, inspired by the speculative realist philosophers such as Manuel de Landa, they see the development of things and objects as existing radically independent of their relationship to discourse, language, politics, etc., and the tradition of neo-Marxist criticism that has been very prevalent in art world theory. Instead, they attempt to connect it to an organic human desire to continue to create objects. The role of the viewer in this scenario is to seek to find the specific nature of their aesthetic experience as such. So what the relationship is between, it's a return to a pursuit of an aesthetic. The resurgence of this kind of philosophical aesthetics has coincided with a new construction of the spectator. When, for example, prominent contemporary artists like Jeff Wall claim that, quote, meaning is almost completely unimportant for their work and, quote, we don't need to understand art, we only need to fully experience it, they place value on effect and experience rather than interpretation and meaning. Rather than contextually grounding and understanding the work and what Thierry Ledoux would call its